the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments and out to work.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, so what does God want Israel to do at this point? It's kind of in the opening verse there. What's he want them to do?
Drive out the Canaanites.
No, he doesn't want them to drive out the Canaanites. What does he want Israel to do? They are situated at the mount. He wants them to leave. It's time to leave. It's time to get up and go, right? They're going to leave Mount Sinai and they're going to travel to Canaan. So what does the Lord say to Moses now? He says, leave. He's part of Israel, so he says, leave. What else does he say to Moses?
I'm not going with you. I might consume you on the way. I'll send some of my angel.
He's definitely going to do that. He reminds him of something. What's he remind Moses of? Yeah, reminds him, I've saved you from Egypt. What else? Does he remind him of the covenant he made with three people? Who are the three people?
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
That's a big theme. That's a big Old Testament. It's actually a big New Testament theme as well. You've got the repeated Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What do we call them? There's one word that we typically use to talk about these guys. Patriarchs. Yeah, we talk about the patriarchs. Patriarchs are a big deal in ancient Israel. And they're a big deal because God makes a covenant with them. And each of them, he renews that covenant. So Lord is talking to Moses. He's reminding him of his promises. He's reminding him of the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he reminds him that he is the one that brought them out. Now, we already talked about it, but in verse 3, what does God say about the people in his presence? His very presence with the people?
They're stiff-necked.
They're stiff-necked people. Is that a compliment?
Stephen said that to him one time.
People didn't like that either.
No, he got stoned.
He got stoned. They can't stone God. They can crucify him now, huh? Stiff-necked people. When you hear that, what do you think? What comes to mind? You think about stiff-necked people. Stubborn, obstinate. What's that? Rigid. They lack humility. Absolutely. So they're stiff-necked people. And is God going to go with them? No, he's not going to go with them. He's going to send an angel to go with them, right? But he's not going to go with them any longer. Now, when Moses was gone for a while, you remember he went up on the mountain? We talked about this. He was gone for a little while. And what happened when Moses was gone?
They rose up to play.
They definitely did that. What did they do before it? They make an idol. Now, what do they think happened to Moses?
He left them.
He left them. He died. Wasn't coming. Something was going on. Moses wasn't coming back. So we're going to get idols and these kinds of things. What were they afraid of? Why, when Moses leaves and doesn't come back for a while, why did they say, well, we don't know exactly what they were thinking, but maybe he's abandoned us, maybe he's dead, we don't know, but What is the motivating factor? What are they afraid of? Why did they create the idol?
To have something to follow.
Yeah, because they're afraid of being alone, right? The fear of being alone. They wanted gods to go before them, and they needed something visible, something visual there. So remember we talked last week that fear was the motivating factor, right? And when fear becomes our motivating factor, we tend to do righteous things, don't we? We do righteous things? Or we do?
No, we can be foolish.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, we can tend to be motivated by fear. We tend to sin like they did. They're motivated by fear and they end up sinning because they are afraid that Moses is gone, that God is not with them. So they want some presence to go with them. So they are afraid of being alone. They're afraid of traveling without God. And as a result of their sin, what's going to happen now? They were afraid of being alone and going it without God. They sin. What happens with the presence of God? Right. So now the very thing that they were afraid of is now coming upon them because they sin against God. So as a result of their sin, they're going to go it alone. Now, he's going to go with them in a sense, right? Because he says he will send an angel, but some kind of special, unique aspect of the very presence of God is no longer going to be with them. He says, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to remove that. I'll send a angel to go before you. But even in the midst of their rebellion, we can see that God is
still there. And even though
Okay.
he's telling them he's not going, maybe he's not going in a more visual where they know, see, hear, feel, whatever. But don't you think he's really didn't abandon them? I mean, he's still there.
well, God is everywhere, but there is something unique going on, right?
There was a much closer presence, or else he wouldn't have said, if I'm with you, I might destroy you.
Yeah, you remember?
So there's a distance.
Yes. Yes. Remember, he comes down on the mountain. What does he say? What's God say when he comes on the mountain? His presence is on the mountain, yes? On Mount Sinai. The presence of the Lord in some real way is on that mountain. And he tells everybody, don't come on the mountain.
Don't touch it, don't walk on the mountain.
Yeah, God is holy, and he will break out against anybody on it. But there was a presence of God that was on that mountain. So in some way, his presence will no longer walk with them because he is holy, and we get the image of that mountain, right? We get the clear teaching of that mountain. Stay away from the mountain because I will break out against you. You know, this is where we get the idea that God can't be in the presence of sin and wickedness, otherwise he'll break out against it. We have to, and to your point, we have to understand there's a difference between God is everywhere and some kind of a localized, intimate presence of the Lord. Because otherwise, then it doesn't make any sense what he's saying, right? And it doesn't make any sense about the mountain. Why is the mountain any less or more holy than if he's present with us always? So there is a unique aspect. What should this remind you of? Oh, something old from their point of view. This should remind you of something. The garden. Yeah, the garden, right? Isn't there a very similar thing going on? God gives Adam and Eve what? A commandment. What's the command? Well, that's later he says, don't eat of the tree. They eat of the tree, they rebel against God, sin enters a picture. Now they can't get into the presence of God anymore, right? You've got the cherub that is there guarding the way back to the presence, the intimacy with God. Think now, here God comes, he rescues his people, he's going to be in an intimate relationship with them as he's giving them his commandments through Moses, right? Moses is getting the 10 commandments. What are the people doing? They're doing the very thing he's commanding them not to do, right? So in a very real way, we've got a reenacting of, in a sense, there's a reenacting of what happened in the garden. The people of God fail again. They sin again. And the presence, see, this is where it's important to understand this presence aspect. God walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. He was with the Israelites in a very intimate, special way. Now he says, because of their sin, he will not walk with them in that way. Does that make sense? We see some of these connections here. We should be starting to see some of these big themed connections. What is going to happen in the future now? From their point of view, all the way up into the New Testament, there's going to be something that happens with the presence of the Lord. For us today, is there a unique aspect to the presence of the Lord today? Say it without giving it away.
Well, there's the Holy Spirit.
So God dwells not with us, but so there is a unique way, and that is because we are made holy, righteous, clean. We're a vessel for the Lord. We're built into a spiritual household for the Lord, those kinds of things, right? So there's some things that we'll look back to in Exodus, they should look back to, and then there's future things. We'll see the last Adam or the second Adam who's going to come and undo all these bad things. Jesus is one like Moses. He is a Moses figure. He goes up on a mountain and he gives the law, reinterprets, right? Retells the law. You've heard it said, but I say, right? You've heard it said, but I say. You've heard it said, but I say. The Sermon on the Mount is a mosaic. It's a Moses imagery. That's what's going on there. So you can see that he's one like Moses. He's the last Adam or the second Adam. He's greater than Solomon, greater than the temple. Jesus is the fulfillment of all these things that are going on. But the very presence of God is going to one day not dwell around his people, but it's going to dwell in his people. And we see that through the Spirit of God in his church. So God is faithful, though. I think one of the points we need to see here is that God is faithful to his promises, but there is going to be a change. He made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He made a covenant with them. He promised them that their people would get into this land. He is going to take them into the land, but there's a big change that happens because of their sin. Is sin a big deal? I think we can see it here, can't we? And we can see it in the garden, and we can see it elsewhere. Sometimes people make light of sin. Sin's not a big deal, or, well, it's only a little white lie, or I only stole a paper clip, or only, right? We can make excuses for why what we do isn't that bad. But to God, sin is a big deal. That's why sin needed to be dealt with, because sin separates. We see it here. Sin separates. God is going to separate himself in a very real way from the people. So sin separates us. We need that sin to be dealt with. All right. So how do the people respond now when God says, I'm going to send an angel with you. You're going to take the land, but I'm not going with you. How do the people respond? They mourn. They mourn, and what else? There's one other thing that they do, and we're going to talk about it.
Oh, they took off their ornaments.
They took off their ornaments. Okay, so they mourn and they take off their ornaments. We didn't look at it, but just before this in the text, God wipes out a whole bunch of them. The Levites go and slaughter a whole bunch of their brothers. Who's for me? Who's for the Lord? There's a separation of the people. There's a great slaughter. And God even brings a plague upon the people. So the people know that God is serious at this point. They've seen him do things in Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea, but they also have seen him just recently take out a whole bunch of the people because of their rebellion and their sin. So they understand that God is serious about this. So they mourn and they lay aside their ornaments. So what are these ornaments? What are we talking about? What's that? Some kind of jewelry. That's right. Absolutely. What kind of jewelry might the Israelites have at this point in history?
Well, they walked out with Egypt, jewels, but they used a lot of them to make golden calf.
They would have used a bunch of it. Probably not all of it, because there's a whole lot of people, right? And I don't know how big that calf was, but they probably had a lot of jewelry. Clearly, they had more because it talks about them taking off the ornaments. So what they had was Egyptian ornaments. And a lot of times, you remember the culture. What is the culture of Egypt?
They had all these gods.
Polytheistic, false paganism, right? They had rituals, they had magic, they had worship. They often associated their ornaments with their gods, with their worship. They often associated it. Sometimes it was used in the worship of these false pagan gods and things. So that's what these people are wearing. But remember, it's not just what they're wearing on the outside, because they've been slaves for how long? About 400 years, right? So generations, they're in slavery in Egypt. It does not appear that they kept strict, laws of God and things of that nature. In fact, they don't have the 10 Commandments yet prior to this. It does not appear that they were faithful to God throughout this whole period of time. In fact, they probably had taken on much of the culture of the Egyptians, don't you think?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's more likely than not, and we see this from the calf issue, the golden image, right? That they just make and worship and all that they are still holding on to paganism. There's still some, and they want a magic talisman too, right? They want something to go before them. So the ornaments, the jewelry, not only was it used in pagan rituals and worship, there's still very likely something going on with them that's connected to Egypt that the ornaments are symbolic of. Does that make sense? That the jewelry that they're wearing is still got a hold on them, but it's got a hold on them because they're still pagan. They still got a lot of pagan thoughts. Otherwise, they would have never done the idol, right? Go ahead, Tim.
Do you think that lends any weight to some of their moaning and grumbling, oh, if only we were still in Egypt? Do you think they have a tie back there that they shouldn't have?
Yes.
Because
yes.
Repeatedly, they'll grumble, like if you would have just left us in Egypt, we would have had all the food we wanted, we would have had.
Yeah.
They reminisce like it was the good old days.
Yeah, and they were slaves. Yeah. I think sometimes we underestimate the influence of culture. Do we do that today? We underestimate the things that are impacting us. Well, they were no different than we are today. We're no different than they were back then, influenced by the things around us. They grow up in a pagan world, a pagan society. They're slaves. They would have certainly taken on at least some of these paganistic concepts and ideas, and we see it in the building of this calf. They think that they're worshiping Yahweh. So there's an influence going on there, and the ornaments are a reminder of their past life that they're still holding on to. Because remember, God says, take it off, and then I'm going to see how I'm going to deal with you. So there's something with the ornaments that they need to strip themselves of and take it off. So God is drawing a line in the sand, and he says that they need to take off and they need to leave off those things from Egypt. They need to do this both literally and figuratively. It needs to be a stripping off, a laying aside of their former way of life. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. See that? Let us lay aside. Let us put it off. Ephesians chapter 4, 22 to 23. Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds. You see, the Apostle Paul is still dealing with people who are wanting to go back to Egypt, who are still living in Egypt, right? Quote unquote, Egypt. Colossians 3, 9 through 10. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator.
Sometimes, no matter how bad things are, there's a familiarity and there's comfort from that familiarity that you know.
No doubt. That's what makes it even harder, isn't it? It would have been hard for these Israelites who've come out of paganism to lay that aside. Of course it's comfortable. It's all we know. It's all we know. Doesn't excuse it. Didn't excuse it for them, but of course it's comfortable. It's what we've always done. It's how we've always lived. It's how they've always lived. You know, you come out of Egypt, it might take a little while for the baggage to come off. We need to be encouraged to do as these texts talk about. Lay aside, put aside, take off. They were to take off these ornaments, but it was bigger than that, wasn't it? It wasn't simply removing the outward materials. That was part of it, but it was symbolic of we're turning our lives over to you. We're turning our backs on Egypt. So the question here, the homework question for us tonight, this is what we'll end with here this evening, is there anything that you're holding on to from your former life? Is there anything that you find comfortable from your former way of living before Jesus that you know is an ornament of Egypt that needs to be removed? If so, the question becomes, how and when will you put it off? How and when are you going to put it off? When are you going to get rid of it? If there is something there, and this is something to think about this week for all of us, is there something that we are holding on to that we are struggling to give up for God because it's comfortable, because it's the old way of doing things, whatever it happens to be, because we're like them back here in Exodus. But do we really want to hold on to that when God says lay it aside and get rid of it? Something to think about. I heard a story about a husband and a wife who were struggling, and true story. They're having rough marriage, and they went in to have some counseling from the preacher. And digging a little bit, the preacher found that the husband was very upset because his wife still had ex-boyfriend's numbers in her phone. And the preacher said, easy fix. Delete the numbers. And the wife said, well, I'm still friends with him. So, but your husband is jealous of there's a struggle here. Something, well, I haven't even called them. And so it's easy to that should be easy then, right? If you haven't even contacted them in so long, but what did she want to do? She, for whatever reason, she wanted to hold on to some past that wasn't good. Wasn't good. We can end up being like that sometimes too. They were like that. They needed to decide, take it off, throw it back. Are we devoted to God? Are we going to be devoted to our past? Here's the thing. Scripture says we're not who we used to be. We need to lay aside those old things, put on the new. Lay aside the old, put on the new. That might be a daily challenge for you, but we're to lay aside and put on. So think about it this week. Is there anything that you're holding on to from your former life that you need to get rid of? Think about that. Any last thoughts, questions, comments? If not,